Info. We're going to go to Fantasy Baseball here, 2021 manager strategies, and I'm going to bring in DVR. Welcome, DVR. My Lord, look at this. Look at this room.
It's all my
I'm not
childhood
used to
toys.
this.
It's everything I had in my parents' basement up until about a year ago all made its way into my background.
Oh, man. And you got the sash just like Michael Beller did. But, man, I remember the room with the window on the right and everything like that. And you got a proper set. This looks so great. Magical Mystery Tour, I think a very underrated album. Thank you very much. Love it. But yeah, thanks a lot for being a part of PitchCon here, DVR.
Thanks for including me. I love being a part of it, and I'm glad that I'm not talking about Victor Robles for another hour this year.
We'll see. Maybe we can get Ryan Bloomfield to bring him up as he comes in here. Welcome, Ryan.
I feel totally unprepared for this thing with my background. We just moved, and my wife's desk is behind me, so I don't know if I can pull off the DVR style background, but I'll run it by her. We'll see what we can do.
Well, if you guys don't know Ryan, I don't know how you missed them. Won the FSWA for Writer of the Year. Very well deserved, Ryan, and of course your Bloom boards. We all love them very much. So we're excited to have you back here, and yeah, thanks for being a part of PitchCon.
Thanks for having me.
Next up is Justin Mason. What's up, Justin?
How you doing? Like, I don't have the setup that DVR has either. I'm literally in a shed right now.
Well, okay, so speaking of this shed, I expect to see you in this shed next weekend, right? Because you have some event going on.
Yeah, next weekend we're gonna do what you guys are doing, and we're gonna turn it back all over again.
Let's do it
and try to get more people to donate money for a great cause. We're raising money. It's going to be for Mental Health America, which I think is a really great organization that does a lot of good, especially in this time right now with COVID and people really struggling emotionally, being isolated. I think it's a great time to emphasize mental health. So we're going to have 2 days. I can't do 4 because I sit on every single panel. So we're doing 2 7-hour days next weekend. You can catch it on my Twitch, on my YouTube channel, my Twitter, my Facebook, all those places. And yeah, we're just going to give out a bunch of prizes and hopefully raise a lot of money for charity.
Yeah, I know that panel. I remember last year my Zoom background, I think, of you smoking a cig. And I think I still have it. So I'm looking forward to but it was like all resolution, like just terrible bit rate stuff. Oh, I can't wait for that. It's gonna be a really fun event. So definitely tune in for that next week. Next up is DJ Short. Congratulations, DJ, on the new brand change to the NBC Edge.
Yeah, it's definitely taken some getting used to. I keep typing in like whatever player X Roto World. I still do it. It's gonna take a little bit of time, but I think it's for the best.
No, really, congrats. I mean, Janice, who just spoke here, actually one of your new employees. Excellent call there. You got a great one in Janice. And yeah, thanks so much for being a part of this.
Of course. Thanks for inviting me.
And of course, we also have Adam Sloate. I know it's Sloate. How you doing, Adam?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. How about you?
Oh, I'm not too bad. Excited for everybody to be talking about fantasy baseball. But yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, calling in from my bedroom here at school in Philadelphia. I'm just happy to be here, talk baseball. Love to do that every day, 24/7,
Yeah, of course. And Adam Sloate, of course, is a member of the Pitcherless staff. So we're happy to have a representative here among all these fantastic analysts across fantasy baseball. But I'm going to leave now. I'm looking forward to this panel. Thank you guys again for being a part of PitchCon.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Looking forward to chatting with you guys here for the next hour. I feel like every time we get to hang out, it's just spending time with my friends. It's like the best job in the world. Going to be fun to get to know you throughout this next hour here, Adam. We're going to go through a lot of different manager strategies, focusing on a few different things: streaming pitchers, actually streaming hitters, drop strategies, and how to maintain and build a bench, and trading. So a lot to get to over the course of the next hour. Absolutely send us questions. We'll try to get as many of those as we can at the end. We'll start with streaming pitchers. And I know this is a topic that Nick Pollock presented on back at First Pitch Florida. The last time I shook hands with people and hugged people in person. It was fun. Trust me, that's a real experience that will exist again someday. A lot of high-level players, of course, stream pitchers, and they stream pitchers effectively. And frankly, they do it because it works. Adam, we want speed at the top of the order. We're going to lead off with you. at a certain point, when you start looking at pitchers, when you're going to stream, you're going after the 2-start pitchers as much as you can. But at a certain point, those skills are not there, and you're taking on too much risk. So how do you adjust your risk tolerance to varying skill sets that are available from pitchers as you're trying to pick up 2-start pitchers and stream effectively?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of different factors that I like to consider in my risk tolerance, especially among the 2-start pitchers. Is the first thing and most important to me is the league format and what your team needs. So like you don't want to crush your one category when you're picking up pitchers, because you want to give yourself a chance to win as many as possible, right? And the league format obviously factors into that. How the rest of your team is playing, obviously another thing that I'm willing to look into when I'm considering risk. Another thing that I think about is, pitcher quality and floor versus ceiling. Do I want like a safe, solid pickup, or do I want the guy who can shoot the moon and, absolutely dominate on one certain day? It depends on really what I need. Like, do I need a huge comeback, or do I want to just kind of maintain and not lose ground on my opponent kind of thing? And then, other factors that I still consider are like the balance of my team. What's the rest of the team look like? Do I have more pitchers pitching on Saturday and Sunday if you're in a weekly league? Matchup quality. And then, sometimes I like to consider long-term effects of the stream. Is it worth holding on to them? Do I want to waste a roster spot? And so on and so forth.
Sure. I'll kick it over to you, Justin. At a certain point, what do you do skills-wise that, like, what stands out to you? What matters when you're streaming or choosing not to stream pitchers?
I mean, it definitely matters what part of the season we're in, right? Because I may take more gambles or less gambles depending on where I'm at in the standings, what I need to make up. And I think that, often people will be maybe a little bit too risky with their starting pitching streaming early in the season, and then they can put themselves into a hole. It's almost like a payday advance loan where you take one and then you're having to take one every single time to get out of the hole you first created. So I tend to play a little bit more conservatively and actually look at guys that I might actually want it to keep for a few weeks, as opposed to I'm picking them up, then dropping them next fab period, or next time I pick up a starting pitcher. So I think for me, it's most important. I think Adam already mentioned this, like looking at my team construct, what I want to do, and not putting myself in a deficit because I'm trying to get ahead with a risky kind of move. So, and I play in a lot of deeper leagues. Obviously, in shallower leagues, there's a lot more available on the waiver wire. Daily moves leagues as opposed to weekly moves leagues. It gives you a lot more kind of flexibility to kind of pick and choose. I really like looking a week ahead, or even sometimes 2 weeks ahead, and saying, hey, this guy's got a great matchup this week, but then maybe 3 starts down the line, he's got another one. So now I can hold on to this guy. Maybe I'll go the extra buck or two.
DJ, as far as your streaming approach goes, is there anything different than what Adam and Justin laid out?
Well, in general, it's hard to be one size fits all because leagues are so different, and there might be a transactions cap, which might be 80 moves in one league or 120 moves in another league. So that really opens it up. But generally, like Justin was saying, in the beginning of the year, I tend to be a bit pickier, but as the year moves along, maybe you're looking more for volume. Maybe you're looking to max out those innings. Maybe you need more wins. So often it just does depend on where you are category-wise.
Yeah, I'm with you guys. I think as the season goes on, if I'm beginning to struggle in the ratios categories especially, my risk tolerance increases a lot. I'll take shots on just about anybody in the pool with just about any matchups, because at that point, if I get strikeouts and wins, great. If I fix my ratios, awesome. They're already in the tank. There's not much I can do to make them any worse. How about you, Ryan? Any other key factors for you as you stream pitchers?
I mean, honestly, the way like pitching landscape has changed the last few years, like I'm finding myself streaming starting pitchers less and less. Like that part of the player pool, the back end starters, the kind of replacement level starting pitchers have been worse than ever. And I actually ran some numbers on this earlier today. In 2020s, the group of starting pitchers that earn less than $5 in 15-team mixed leagues, so that's generally kind of your cohort that you're going to be picking from to stream, that group had a 5.20 ERA last year and a 1.45 WHIP. That's the first time in the last, at least I've got data back 12 years. That's the first time in at least 12 years that that group's ERA has even been above 5. So that kind of talent level at the back end of the pitching pool is really bad. And maybe some of that is the ball the last few years. So maybe some of that will change in 2021 with the deadened ball. But I'm finding myself, instead of opening myself to risk on some of those ratio blow up outings, those when you open up your phone and see your streamer go 2 innings and give up 7 runs, that's like the worst feeling in fantasy baseball. I'm finding myself just kind of streaming middle relievers and just trying to keep my ratios intact. Maybe you get, a few less strikeouts, maybe you don't get a win, but you kind of shield yourself a little bit from those like terrible blow up outings when you're streaming.
I totally agree. I mean, like, let's say this past or last season you had, for some reason early in the year, you had a hunch about Devin Williams, and you saw how well like Tyler Matzik was throwing. I just combined their numbers earlier today. So they ended up with 8 wins, 1.61 ERA, 96 strikeouts, and 56 innings. Trevor Bauer, who won the Cy Young Award, 1.73 ERA and 100 strikeouts. So like, if you don't want to take, huge risks and swings with, random pitchers off the waiver wire, and instead you focus on a pitcher who's having a great relief season, you could get Cy Young caliber production out of 2 spots.
Yeah, I think this kind of steers us into a broader question. Like, how many of your active pitching spots can you reasonably use for streaming? And maybe if you said 2 or 3 in the past, are you allocating one of those spots now pretty consistently to streaming relievers and churning players from that part of the pool? I mean, is that something you've incorporated into your strategy too, Adam?
Yeah, I think the maximum for me these days is 2 starting pitchers at most. You can't always count on streamers, especially in the deeper leagues. There's not always going to be a high quality streamer that you're going to want to pick up. And so sometimes you have to look elsewhere and maybe find relievers, but quite often, especially in like the very deep leagues, I find myself not being able to find 2 starting pitchers that I can feel comfortable plugging in. And ultimately, sometimes you just have to say, I don't want to pick anybody up. I'm just going to, take the L or just hope that something goes my way and just, not hurt your own ratios that way.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we should incorporate into our thought process, like aside from including relievers, are the followers, right? The SPARPs, as we used to call them. Justin, you're nodding. I mean, is that a big part of your streaming plan? It's not necessarily the guy taking the ball and trying to go 5 who gets crushed, trying to get through that lineup the 3rd time, but maybe someone who's being optimally used by a team that throws an opener in front of him and is quick to get that guy out before he's overexposed.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I used to great effect last year. And, one of the guys I was really high on was Tyler Mahle, because I felt like, well, he wasn't in the rotation, but he might be the first man up and get some sneaky wins. And that was largely because I didn't know how teams were going to handle pitcher workloads. We're running into the same type of issue this year. We don't know. We're all guessing. This team's going to have a 6-man rotation. This team's not going to let guys pitch deep into the season or deep into outings. We really don't know. I doubt the teams really know at this point. So there are definitely going to be guys that I start looking at, the Yusmeiro Petits of the world, the Tomlins of the world that maybe aren't sexy and nobody else is going to draft them at the end of a 30-round draft. But I might take a shot here and there, especially guys like with the Mahle type profile that has a real chance of maybe, getting into the rotation at some point and being a long-term starter. I think that is a very reasonable strategy, especially if you're playing in those 15-team leagues, which when you get to the end of the draft, like, do you really want to take Jose Quintana? I don't know that I do. I might as well take a guy that has better skills and could, get some cheap wins early in the season and then find himself in the rotation later.
I think how we manage our teams in season is more connected to how we build those teams on draft day than we probably realize. Thinking about what you guys are saying and some of the numbers that Ryan was putting out there earlier, are you tackling pitching differently in your draft? I mean, DJ, are you being more aggressive with starting pitching than usual coming off of the unusual shortened 2020 season? Are you with the masses who are really pushing pitchers up the board even more than usual, trying to avoid digging into the waiver wire later on, knowing that the quality of those replacement pitchers might be as low as ever?
Right. I think that's definitely the case. But maybe it changes this year because of if the baseball is slightly deadened, maybe that evens the playing field a little bit and we could adjust our strategy all over again going into next year. But right now, I think I'd want at least 2 pitchers that I feel really, really good about. So for me, in a standard 12-team draft, like maybe I draft 2 pitchers in my first 6 picks, something like that.
Definitely getting 2 in the first 6. How about you, Ryan? How aggressive are you with pitching this year compared to a normal year?
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge. I mean, I think the obvious play is to be more aggressive early on with your starting pitching, just because I mean it used to be 5-10 years ago. You like Todd Zola says, you bully hitting and you'll figure out pitching later. You can't really do that now. The kind of the flip side of that though is like almost everybody is doing that in drafts right now. And DVR, like I believe it was you who dubbed the yellow brick road narrative that that second round of starting pitchers, like I've been in a bunch of drafts where almost the entire second round is all starting pitchers. There's got to be kind of a zig there because everybody's doing kind of the same thing and pushing up starting pitching. Again, it makes sense because you don't want to be left with the scrap pile of that group at the end of the pool. But you get to a certain point. Rob Silver has talked about this as well, with just kind of the consistent groupthink that's been going on early in drafts. There has to be, what's that alternate path to kind of make you stand out and take advantage of the hitters that are falling. Cause right, it's a 0-sum game, every single snake draft. If someone goes up, someone's got to go down, but while also making sure that you don't find yourself scrambling for 3 starting pitchers in the end game, because that's where you really get yourself into trouble, especially with the ratio. So I don't really have a great answer for you, to be honest. Like the thing that everybody's doing makes sense. Like it's the proper play, but if everyone's doing it, there's got to be a little bit of a better way to counteract that.
How about you, Adam? Are you joining the crowd and pushing pitching up, or are you going to kind of zig where everybody else is zagging and maybe go the other way?
Quite honestly, I think I'm going to go with the masses here to an extent. I'm happy to grab the value hitters, but I'm not going to be completely left behind when it comes to, top quality starting pitcher, because I don't want to leave it up to the volatility of the waiver wire completely. Like I don't mind streaming a 1 or 2, but to completely disregard pitching at the expense of value hitters, it's just not for me.
Now, Justin, I've seen you in a one-piece swimsuit before, so I know you're very comfortable going your own direction, doing things your own way. Are you going on your own? Are you the kind of person who's going to take this year's board and say, you know what, I'm getting hitting early, I'm going to find some mid-round pitchers that people are wrong about, and I'm just going to win because I've got a unique build?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna do exactly what opposite of what everybody else is doing, and it's really about not so much trying to be different, but trying to take being opportunistic. I'm an opportunistic drafter. When I got a draft tonight, it's a tag team draft, champion, whatever think it is, and we're picking one. We're gonna take the best player on our board, and then whatever comes to us. If it's pitching, great. If it's hitting, I'm going to take hitting. I'm going to take the best. I'm going to put together the best possible team, and I'll figure out how to make up my deficits later. You don't want to fall completely behind. I wouldn't recommend doing, like the old Nick Pollock in a 12-teamer where you don't take a pitcher for the first 7 or 8 rounds, because not everybody can diagnose pitching the way he can. But I think there are a lot of values, and I think there are been a lot of overreactions to 2020, especially in the pitching market, where you can get guys later that were top 10 pitchers last year. Patrick Corbin, is going outside like the top 80, 90 picks. There are guys that you can do this with. And every year we have guys pop from the middle or the late of the draft in pitching up into the 2nd and 3rd rounds. You just have to be able to diagnose those players and find them. And every year some people take pitching early and they end up with the Justin Verlanders and the Chris Sales, and they're hurting for it. So I'm not saying one way is right or the other, but I'm also not going to give another team added value because I'm afraid to take it by being left behind in a certain category or position.
I mean, think about it. Most starters made at the most like 10 starts last year. If you had a couple of bad starts, it just torpedoed everything. Yeah. So if you can look at the underlying metrics, you might be able to find some really, really nice values in those middle rounds.
Yeah, and I think that's more how I see it. I'm probably closer to where Justin is. I'm stepping away from what the crowd is doing, or at least trying to. Every board's different. Every room's different. There's going to be times where drafting pitching early makes sense based on where I'm positioned, who I'm playing against, and what happens to fall to me. But I think in addition to the usual injury risk that always comes with pitchers early, we've now added this short season with a ton of statistical variance, and that is causing us to draft pitchers who haven't necessarily earned early round pricing yet. And I think that's what makes snake drafts even harder than auctions this year. Auctions, it's like really easy to just kind of go do what you want in terms of the structure of the roster that you want to build. There's kind of an overlapping question when it comes to streaming that I want to throw at you guys as a group. How often do you change your evaluations of teams? Like when you're streaming pitchers and you're looking for good matchups, you're picking on teams that are probably bottom 3, bottom 5 in WRC plus. They strike out a lot, or you're looking for parks that you're picking on all the time. But eventually, you have to adjust a little bit in season. There's going to be a handful of teams that surprise us, teams that strike out less than we thought, teams that are just better than we expected offensively. I guess the Giants last year, maybe you're one of those teams, plus the park change too. Adam, how quick are you to adjust your evaluation of a matchup in season?
Typically I don't like to overreact to a smaller sample size. Like I think Justin was mentioning it earlier. I really like to wait a handful of weeks before I really change anything, especially at the start of the season. Like even 3-4 weeks is probably as much as I'm waiting to really change my opinion of certain teams. And even that can be, some teams have just like scorching hot months where they're not exactly the same team the rest of the year. The Mariners of a couple of years ago come to mind. But once you start to get later into the season, I'm starting to look at it through the lens of maybe a DFS matchup where I'm sort of looking, at the one day evaluation, but early on, definitely taking a longer view of it, really evaluating the team based on talent as opposed to the early numbers and letting that guide my strategies.
How about you, Justin? How long can you go into the season before a team has officially changed its identity in your evaluations?
Typically about a month is where I'm looking at. I mean, I'm always evaluating and looking at things, and I'm trying to be more aggressive. And I think this can be talked about in the same way as when you're ready to get rid of a guy or something off your roster. I'm trying to be a lot more aggressive in my evaluations because you don't want to fall behind the curve. But I mean, this is a really good point because last year all of us thought Minnesota was a really, really good offense, right? And if you didn't stream against them, middle of the season, end of the season, you probably missed out on some really good opportunities. So I think the old style of playing in which, I trust my evaluations and I'm going to stick with them no matter what happens, I think is kind of falling by the wayside. And I think we need to be more aggressive in every aspect of our evaluations and our game.
So DJ, what would matter to you in season? Is it statistically something like a team increase in strikeout rate or a star player going down? What are you looking for before you change an evaluation?
Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe you'd look at a team like the Padres or the Yankees or whatever differently if a star or a 2 was on the injured list. And obviously that would totally change the dynamic because you might have something close to a replacement level player taking their spot, something like that. And that's a huge difference. And that adds up. So in addition to, taking stock of early season statistics, sometimes that's just a gut feeling for me early in the year. But obviously things change based on personnel.
Anything else that comes into play for you, Ryan?
It's funny how just an observation. It's funny how we spend, 5 months in the off season working on projections and playing and, evaluating hitters and pitchers. And we know exactly what we want to do with it. And then opening day starts. And then 2 weeks later, we just throw all that out the window and not try and hold too long. I mean, it's just funny. I mean, it used to be Memorial Day was the time where you would kind of take stock in your team and make adjustments that way. But the more I'm finding out, the more you wait, the more you're just letting good opportunities go by early in Fab. So I'm learning to try and be more aggressive that way, but it is hard where you're just on a guy through January, through February, through March, and then he has a bad April and you're like, okay, what do I do now? So
last year was the ultimate test of that for maybe players who are, set on their preseason draft rankings. Cause it's only 2 months. You needed to act fast on some of these breakout guys or cut bait on players who are struggling or hurt.
And that's going to be a benefit to a lot of us that have played that, older style of fantasy like I have for many years where I really trust my evaluations. Ryan said we've been doing this since January. A lot of us have been doing this since October. If you're writing for, the Forecaster or, any sort of magazine or your own, draft guide, you've been on this since the end of last season. And so it is hard to just throw it all out there. But you have to trust what you see when you're watching games, and then trust, the stats that come in that back that up, and kind of trust your process there a little.
Yeah, and I think we've got more granular tools now than we used to have that help us believe in things a little sooner than the stabilization points of stats that we used to rely on to help us guide that decision making, right? That patience was rooted in a different set of numbers. Now we have more information, and trying to find that sweet spot of using it correctly, I think, is really important. I think we all probably stream pitchers a ton, and a lot of people watching the stream, you've probably streamed pitchers before. Streaming hitters, though, doesn't seem like it gets quite as much attention, looking for good matchups for hitters and taking advantage. Everyone's looking for guys going into Coors and stuff. That's pretty easy. But I want to ask this. Ryan, how much of an impact can streaming hitters have over a full 162-game season?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a different game in terms of streaming pitchers and streaming hitters, for me at least. Like when I'm looking at streaming pitchers, I am looking at matchups, looking at skills, those sorts of things. But for hitters, I'm more just looking at like volume for the week. If I've got hitters available with 7 games that week, and even last year, like the Cardinals, half the weeks were playing 8 or 9 games. I mean, some of them were 7 innings, but I'm really looking to maximize volume when I'm streaming hitters and worry a little bit less about the actual matchups. Like, sure, sometimes if you're running into like Cleveland, like last year, and you're facing Bieber, Carrasco, and Plesac or whatever, like, yeah, maybe at the extreme that comes in there. But for hitters, I'm really just looking at compiling at-bats, plate appearances as much as I can. And over a full season, I actually ran these for the Forecaster 2 years ago. If you just replace your last 2 guys with 2 replacement level players each week and pick up 2 games each there, in a 15-team league, you're getting 6 homers, 20 runs, 20 RBIs, 3 steals. And that's just free stats. And that's a 15-team league replacement level. Wow. You get even more of an advantage in shallower leagues, like with a 12-teamer, where the replacement level is that much better. So that's one of those edges. I mean, it is a lot of work. It is a lot of time to put in every week to look at those schedules and see who's playing the most volume of games. But if you do that and consistently churn it over 26 weeks, I mean, you're picking up like almost half a roster spot for free. And that does add up over time for sure. And I know leagues get decided, Gregor Blanco, on the last day of the season all the time. I had to throw that in there, Mason. But yeah, I mean, that stuff's going to matter.
It seems to happen to me every year. Just, last at bat of the season, losing thousands of dollars, it's what it is, right?
Exactly. But yeah, you look at your standings and what if I had, 10 more homers or 25 more runs or RBI? I mean, that matters. So yeah, to kind of wrap that up, volume is what I'm kind of looking to compile when I'm streaming hitters, as opposed to pitchers more on the kind of the matchups and the skill side of it.
And Adam, I think this leads us to a similar question we have with pitchers. It's like, what are you willing to tolerate skills-wise? Ryan said replacement-level hitters. I think of guys like Hanser Alberto a couple of years ago. He's just playing. He's not good. But if I did a better job of turning guys like that into my lineup, that's great. Who is he going to play over? I think that's the type of decision we're left with. So how do you convince yourself that the volume is enough when you're looking at Hanser Alberto versus, I don't know, maybe like a Gavin Lux if he's up and playing? You get this prospect who you love so much and you want him to be so good, but the playing time is a little more shaky.
Yeah, and that's something that you always have to weigh when you're thinking about plugging hitters in. Is he going to be better than what I've got? Is it going to be worth dropping this guy who may play 1 or 2 less games a week? Like, you're trusting your good hitters to be good, and sometimes that's better than maybe getting more at bats. It's just something you're going to have to weigh, obviously, when it comes down to those decisions. And with weekly leagues, it's a little different as well. It's even more tricky if you're trying to do that daily. It makes it a little easier, but ultimately for me, it's are they going to provide more value than what I've got? Do I really like the players that I'm playing right now, and can I get something better on the waiver wire? That's really just what it comes down to.
Justin, where do you go as you try and map out games for the week? I mean, you're probably breaking things down by handedness of pitchers for those lineups too, right? Because a 7-game week is not necessarily a 7-game week for a lefty that sits against same-handed pitchers. So how do you kind of put all the pieces together as you're making these decisions?
Yeah, I mean, luckily I started last year doing kind of a weekly planner article, and so I was like coming up with all these guys and really digging into the schedule. And I mean, roster resource is like your best friend when it comes to that kind of thing, or whatever scheduling tool you use, and you got to stay on top of it. I mean, the hard part is it's not easy to do. Especially for hitters, because things change, and especially in the world of COVID and games being missed, and starters getting pushed back or things like that, you might bet on that Hanser Alberto thinking you're going to get some really good splits, on this upcoming schedule, and all of a sudden you're kind of screwed. So, I mean, for me, it's always talent first, and then I look for every possible advantage. But some, like Ryan said, I mean, you can gain a lot of ground if you can do it well. It's just not always super easy, especially if you're in a weekly format. Daily moves, obviously, you can play the matchups a little bit easier. But, a lot of the industry has moved towards NFBC, and that Friday switch can be really, really important. And so if you can get ahead in Fab by grabbing guys who've got, 2 lefties out of 3 games on that Friday schedule, it's definitely worth going after.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have a system that works for you for making sure you do not miss a lineup cutoff, especially if you're playing 2 changes per week for the first time in the NFBC. Like whatever Google Calendar reminders you need, sticky notes, if you need your 5-year-old to come hit you with a plastic baseball bat an hour before lock every Friday to remind you that extra change, do whatever you have to do to not miss that, because what Ryan's numbers kind of drive home is that every stat actually matters. Like playing time is so important in our game. If we're talking 6 homers, 20 RBIs, 20 runs, and 3 steals, that's 5 or 6 standing points in most leagues. Yeah. And that's actually the difference between 3rd and 1st in some leagues. So the grind is actually worth it. And it kind of reminds me more of like DFS prep in some ways. And I think it's one of those strange ways that the way you think about something like DFS or leagues with daily moves, it could actually make you a better weekly player in a weird way, because you're starting to look at some things like starting pitcher matchups and elite bullpens for hitters that you previously hadn't really thought much about. So, DJ, how much information are you incorporating in season to a weekly lineup decision with your hitters?
Absolutely. I think what you just said about the DFS, like it did kind of make me a better fantasy player in the introduction of it, because you also start to notice lineup trends a lot more than maybe you would in the past. And you start to think about things like handedness and ballpark and things like that. So to me, it's also sort of like a pie chart when I'm thinking about streaming hitters. It's like, yeah, the volume's great. Ideally, you'd want 7 games over 6, but maybe the player who has 6 games is going to play, 3 games at Yankee Stadium. They're in the middle of the lineup. So like, it's all, it's like a puzzle you're putting together, and ultimately you have to make a judgment call. And, the other part about, spending Fab is like, you may have the ideal hitter you want, and then you lose and you don't get that hitter. And then you have to settle for your second best option. And then you have to juggle stuff all over again. So yeah, it's definitely an ongoing process.
This question for everybody. We'll start with Ryan again. Do you find that you are initially glued to your draft day or auction day valuations when you're making your lineup decisions, though? Like, how influenced are you by what you paid on draft day in terms of making those final decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the right answer is to say that I'm not, and I don't want that opportunity cost and sunk cost fallacy. But we're all humans. Like, if you don't want to give up on on someone who you paid a pretty good price for, the thing that I find sometimes, this happened to me I was big on like Avisel Garcia last year. A lot of times, and this is just on me, like I didn't even I just kind of think of him as almost a set and forget. I mean, he's not a star, but he's someone who in a 15-team league, I'm going to just keep in there and go. And he kind of falls through the cracks, and then you look a month later and he's just been horrible. And you got to make a move there. So, I mean, to kind of cut to the chase, like I almost think of my, maybe in like a 30-round draft, 23 starters, my first like 18 to 20 picks as, I'm going to hold those guys and do what I can with those guys. And then after the 20th round, I almost think of those guys as interchangeable pieces. So I'm either taking flyers on save speculations guys, and if it doesn't work out, I just dump them and try and replace them in Fab. If I'm in a league that has IL spots, maybe I'm grabbing a late Severino or Noah Syndergaard or somebody and just stashing him on the IL and then replacing him with with somebody from the wire. And then there's a lot of great content out there. I know Pitcher List had a really good, I think it was Nick himself who put it together, either Nick or Alex, so actually drafting to the schedule. And your last couple picks, you're almost taking those guys as streaming options for the whatever the schedule is for the first 2 weeks. So kind of the short answer to that is really my last like 8 to 10 picks. I'm almost viewing those guys as churnable, high upside or streamable type picks, where if I drop them, it's not that big of a deal.
You take a similar approach, Adam?
Yeah. Right there with Ryan. Definitely those last few hitters are and players are pretty much interchangeable. But when it comes to like draft day and ADP, we do all this research in October, November, so on and so forth. I don't want to just discard that and throw it away immediately. I want to start out with valuing that draft day process a little bit more than I normally would. And then as the season progresses, I'm going to value that less and less and less. And so there's a reason that they're being, picked at a certain place. You have to trust in that, even if they're not producing results immediately, but eventually you got to phase it out and just pay attention to what they're producing.
So Justin, is there like a balance to not necessarily cutting those players that you really like, but just having the discipline to reserve them, like actually just pushing them aside and saying, hey, look, like I'm not cutting you yet. I'm just trying to make some room for somebody who's playing more.
It's like with your kids, you give them a timeout. You've been bad for this team. You need to go to your room for a little bit. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And like I said before, when we were talking about evaluating teams, like I'm evaluating my own team much more aggressively than I used to. I used to be that person that would say, no, I took this guy in the third round. He is staying in my lineup. But I mean, I need to trust, what I see on the field and, what I see in the numbers when they start coming out, and be willing to say, hey, you know what, maybe I made a mistake here. Or, maybe there's something going on. We forget that baseball players are people too. Last year was crazy for a lot of guys because the world was crazy. And, a lot of times we don't know what's affecting players off the field. And sometimes they do just need to get a little time out on my team. And I'm okay with that. I'm trying much better to not worry so much about the name value or the price I, paid to get them in terms of evaluating for my actual team and really try to put the best possible production on my roster.
How about you, DJ?
Are you proposing that we change the reserve list to the timeout list? Or?
I like this. I mean, I'm sorry, Orlando Arcia. You're just not producing. It's time for a timeout.
How about you, DJ? How do you separate yourself from your draft day prices?
I mean, I'm like Ryan was saying, the last 5 spots, I'm kind of like, even on draft day, I'm like, I may not even keep these guys, but this looks good for now. I usually try to take advantage of an injured player because it's like a free roster spot. So I try to find someone who could make some sense. Maybe they'll be back fairly quick. That's probably more ideal, but I do try to do that. As for reserving players, it kind of depends on what skill set they have, because maybe you'd be a little more patient with someone who's a power hitter and they could have 30 plus homer potential. Maybe you'll be a little more patient there, or maybe you'll be a little more patient with someone who is particularly speedy. Like I think of Malik Smith over the past 2 years. Obviously that didn't work out, but like you're willing to be a little bit patient on that because he could lead the league in steals. So it varies.
So much value coming from one category, and sometimes those categories like steals can come in bunches. You get a matchup against a team that doesn't hold runners well, or a catcher that you could run all over, and Malik Smith gets 4 or 5 steals in 3 games and kind of has 2 weeks in 3 days. Like that's the kind of thing that he's capable,
if only
should be capable of doing. That kind of player, a speedster is capable of having that. Maybe not Malik Smith necessorily.
Mondesi. We saw what Mondesi did early in the season last year, and he still got you your speed with like 8 stolen bases in the first month, but he also batted like what I would have batted had I been in the major leagues, but you didn't want to cut him because he's got such game-changing skills that when he did catch fire, he could have won you your league.
Yeah, in some cases he was a late push back up to the top. There's a pretty big gap in the amount of content that our industry produces when you look at like waiver stuff, recommendations of who to add versus the content of who to drop. Like I started writing ads and drops at The Athletic 2 years ago, and there are some weeks I don't even write up players to drop. I just basically write a note that's effectively, I'm very tired, I'm going to stop now, I'll write some drops next week. and that's not really fair to the readers. I'm very sorry. Please subscribe to The Athletic. But it's like when you don't have an easy drop, what factors are you taking into consideration? Because we love the teams we draft. So, like, DJ, like, what goes into your evaluation process when you finally are going to cut a player loose? And when it's not obvious, a player gets sent down, a player goes on the IL for a while. That's an easy drop. That's, in a weird way, a gift in the decision-making process because you don't have to expend a lot of energy thinking about it.
To me, it comes down to a couple of factors. One maybe being depth. Do I have multi-position eligible players where I can sacrifice a little bit? The other might be, what is the replacement level at each position? Is it easier to have like a big bopper first baseman type than a speed guy? So sometimes it might just come down to that, or category need. There's just a few.
Talking about drops is for me at least, it's so team specific and roster specific that at least as an analyst or a writer, it's very hard to just kind of have an across the board, like drop this guy, as opposed to, pick up this guy. Like, I don't know. It's very specific to each roster, I think, which is not a cop out. Like, we should definitely pursue it. And I think it has a ton of value to our readers and to our consumers. But it's a very difficult, like, to do what DJ was saying. Like, if you've got 3 good first basemen and your 4th one's not doing well, like, that makes it a lot more of a cut. Whereas someone else who's a little bit thin there, it isn't. So the team specificity, if that's a word, makes it very hard to kind of produce content that is applicable to so many different formats.
And it's so hard too from like an industry perspective, because like if you're talking about who you might drop in a 10 or 12 team league, if you're writing an article like the next day about who to add in a 15 team league, it might be the same person. And that can be super confusing. It's one of the reasons why it's so hard to write points league content, because every league is different in points leagues. Like nobody plays by the exact same rules. And so it's so hard to offer really good fantasy related advice for points leagues. But it's kind of just a struggle of the industry. And I know there are some people who do really good job on those kind of pieces. I'm talking about it on podcasts who to drop, but I tend to try to stay away from that because I'm afraid of giving bad advice or someone misconstruing the advice I'm giving.
I've written a column called Waiver Wired at NBC Roto World since 2010. So it's been a while. And that's definitely a sentiment I try to keep in mind. And, the best example might be like a top prospect comes up and obviously everyone's just like, good, go pick him up. But like, you got to add some more context to this. And like the way that I've found to do it is like when you're describing the player to pick up, a waiver wire recommendation, you also want to put that player in the context of where maybe they fit in kind of the grand scheme of things and who you might be able to replace. Like that's the least you can do. It's so hard to be one size fits all, but I try to do that while also saying, here's why you should pick this player up. Like where's the comparable player?
Yeah, and to add on to that, when I am reading this content from, drop this guy and speaking on, team specific advice, sometimes I'm in these really deep leagues where it's like, drop this first baseman that that's my starting guy because I don't have, other people. It just makes me a little sad. I die a little inside just seeing, drop this guy. And I'm like, wait, but he's my starting first baseman. I need him. But when it comes to not having an easy drop, I like to think about, what's my long-term plan for this spot? Is this going to be a streaming spot? Is this going to be a spot where I'm stashing someone? Or, do I want to keep a guy, but put him in, timeout or something? Once you have that sort of answer for what you want that spot to be, you can start to formulate a broader strategy for who you want to add or drop.
Yeah, I think there's also a bench composition question that we're kind of like poking at here. I mean, DJ, as you think about like a typical 7-player bench for 14 hitters and 9 pitchers, if we're just kind of using that as the base framework, how do you want to build that out? Like, how many players do you want who can actually slot in as a hitter? How many available pitchers do you want? And how many spots, if any, are you willing to allocate towards stashing an injured player or stashing away a prospect that either was sent down or that you're hoping will come up at some point during the season?
Right. I mean, this is kind of going back to the multi-position eligible guys. Like that would be ideal for me because I do like to churn through my roster with streamers or relievers. So, if I have one spot that I know can be, maybe an outfielder / middle infielder, like that would be ideal. A Max Muncy, first base, second base, third base. He's not necessarily on your bench, but you could plug and play as much as necessary. Jurickson Profar is a pretty good example too of someone who maybe isn't in your lineup every day, but you can plug and play as the matchups warrant. So there's lots of ways you could go about it. As for prospects, I don't really get attached to prospect pitchers as much as hitters because it's so erratic with young pitchers. First off, like you don't know if they're going to be on an innings limit. If they struggle in one start, they might get sent down. So, sometimes you can get in a trap that way with prospect pitchers. With hitters, though, I do tend to believe in that a bit more. I think we've seen that young hitters coming up and succeeding right away. It's happening more and more, obviously. So I might be willing to stash a prospect, especially right now. Like we heard today, the Mariners chairman saying, Jared Kalenich's going to be up at the end of April. I'm like, okay, noted. So maybe you're willing to wait a month for a prospect like that. But I'd say
among other things that were said in there.
No Julio Rodriguez this year either, according to Kevin Mather, right?
It was very newsworthy for a Rotary Club meeting. I'll say that.
Yeah, I went to a Rotary Club meeting in high school for something, and it didn't seem like it was that exciting. But
no.
Could you imagine being asked to speak at something like that and losing your job the following Monday? I think that's what's about to happen.
It's like the lowest risk place you could go and somehow find a way to get fired. Like you got fired for things you said at a Rotary Club meeting. What happened to you? Moving on.
The Rotary Club meeting hurt around the world, but to kind of go back to DVR, what you were asking, like how many of us last year like could not, at least in weekly leagues, like literally could not fit a team because of COVID and people out and teams being canceled. Like I'm finding myself more and more like not being able to stash prospects or wait for injured guys in leagues where I don't have an IL. And I think we're going to be in that same boat, at least in the first half of the 2021 season. Like I don't necessarily see this changing until a lot of the players get vaccinated and that sort of thing, maybe in the second half of the year. I found myself in NFBC leagues where we have a 7-man bench. Like 5 of those 7 guys were hitters for me because just so many games were getting canceled and contact tracing and all that it was really hard to feel the lineup sometimes. So I'm probably going to continue that, at least in my drafts for 2021 in the early part of it, because I think that's going to be the case, unfortunately, going to be the case again to start out the season.
Yeah, I think there's just some general advice we'll pass along, and we'll get on to some trading. I'd be less optimistic about stashes now than you have been in the past. 2020 was, I think, a little bit instructive for what 2021 is going to be like. I think we're all thankful the season looks like it's going to be a normal 162 game season, but we're still going to have more absences than usual, whether that's from the virus itself or just players breaking down because of how weird everything was. So having players, multi-eligible position players up and down the roster certainly gives you that extra flexibility, but not having injury optimism, which is just, it's so hard not to have that, not to have those IL guys stashed away on your bench for too long is really important too. But I do want to get to trading. And Justin, I know you've been in a million leagues in the last 10 years, so you've been on the receiving end of some bad trade offers. I think we all have. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people making when they initiate a trade offer or trade talks with you?
I think they try to win the trade too much. I always say that trading is just like a romantic relationship. If you screw over your partner one too many times, you're going to by yourself, right? I mean, what you want to do is have relationships with people that they feel good about the work you've done together at the end of the day, because you might win the first trade, but there may not be a second opportunity, especially if you're playing with people that you're going to play with for a long time, years and years. You want to make sure you have good relationships. You're not the guy that, takes advantage of people during trades and things like that. And I think often in the industry and because of the TV show The League, we want to be like the guy that wins the trade, that it was like, oh, you crushed him. And I don't think that works well long term. You look at like the most notorious traders in our industry, in guys like Ian Codd and Fred Zinke. And every time you talk to the people they trade with, they say, you know what? I got a good deal. He got a good deal. Everybody won. And I think if you want to be known as a good trade partner, it starts by, being honest, and working with the person and trying to help them as much as they're helping you.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I mean, BJ, how much of it is just taking the time to figure out what the other person is looking for? Whether you call and ask them, email and ask them, or look at their roster, like doing any one of those things seems kind of like step one before making a good competitive offer.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, step number one is considering the need of the other person. Like a dynasty example is a good one. Like, if you are a win now team and you get an offer from somebody that, they're taking potentially some of your best players, and you're like, wait, I'm in my win curve right now. Like, why would you be asking for those guys? So, yeah, you want, as far as a trading partner, someone who looks at your roster and is thoughtful about it. And yeah, maybe you had a recent injury or something like that, and then they go look at your roster, they look at your category need, and they give you a thoughtful offer. It's just a starting point. But if you have a fellow owner or player who recognizes that, you kind of respect that at the start of a negotiation.
What do you do when you get a terrible offer, Ryan? I mean, do you ever just ignore it completely? Do you respond and tell someone that it's not close? Like, how do you come back from that, or how do you handle it when that comes in?
Yeah, I mean, I'll respond, but typically it'll be a non-starter. Like, I won't say like "screw you" or whatever, but I'm just I'm too nice for that. But I mean, I'll just say like, I mean, that's not that's not going to work out, or I'm not interested. Just because like the worst, I don't know, it's just such a turnoff to. Hey, I get an email from somebody. Hey, I'm interested in player X and Y. Make me an offer. And it's like, no, like I'm not going to do that. If they take the time to, I mean, as DJ and Justin, you guys were saying, you guys hit it on the head. Take the time and at least pitch why this might make sense as a first step to you. Then I'm willing to engage. But if I just get an offer out there, like I'll say I'm not interested, and I'll kind of just shut it down from there. It doesn't really like motivate me to put in the time when I just get that kind of cold cut email saying they're interested in this player. So
yeah, if you get a one word no back from me on the email, you're probably not getting a counter offer later. Like, that's just not going to happen. It's more of a time sort of thing that you mentioned, Ryan.
Exactly.
How about you, Adam? How do you deal with bad trade offers? Because they're everywhere.
Right. And, just sometimes straight up telling the manager, like, this is not an acceptable offer for me. Sometimes they may not, maybe realize that they're sending something that's almost offensive to you to even receive. So, letting them know straight up can also help. And, I try to be nice and think about, your relationship with the other managers is constantly changing. You don't want to screw up. You don't want to cut one guy off from your trading completely, because then that takes away one trade partner. And so just letting them know in a polite way, like, look, I don't want this trade offer. This is bad. I'm not interested. And just sort of being honest but polite with them can keep that line of communication open for future trades if you so choose. But, something to keep in mind if they're continually sending you these awful offers is, maybe you don't take them seriously as a trade partner right away.
Yep. And the last thing I'll add is just like be direct. I mean, and DVR, you mentioned this. I mean, it takes time to consummate a deal sometimes, and maybe I've said this in the past, but like the phrase I hate the worst is like, yeah, I might be willing to consider that, and it's like, what does that even mean? Just be direct and make it quick and efficient, because we're all busy and trading takes time, and that's honestly one of the least parts of the game that I like is just kind of going through that back and forth 5-10 times to try and get a deal done. So
yeah, there's a comment here from Glass Cobra. Who would you want for X? Like, just like try to make an offer. Like do some of the homework and just try to move things along. Like make a first offer. I think related to that, Justin, is it ever a good idea to use the league message board or the trade block feature to let people know what you're trying to do in mass? Or is it better to sort of keep that information to yourself and to seek out trade partners on your own?
No, I think you should. I I wish I was in leagues where that was mandatory. Before you make a trade, you need to update your trading block, because there's no worse feeling than seeing two other people in your league agree to a trade and you're like, I would have given you a hell of a lot more for player X had I had any idea he was available. And for someone like me, especially who's in 25 plus leagues every day, like I don't have time to go through every single team in every single league and figure out who's actually looking for something. So please use those things, because it's really frustrating. And going back to what you guys were talking about just a second ago, I'm of the opinion, be the first person to offer the first trade. Often the framework for a deal is built off of that first offer, and so it's actually in your best interest. I know that's really scary because people are like, well, what if they accept it right out and I gave away too much? Well, then you've got a trade partner for later on in the season or next year because they feel like they got a good deal. Don't be afraid to offer the first one, because typically that's the foundation of a deal.
Do you agree with that, DJ? Try to make the first offer?
Yeah, if you can act fast. And certainly, I think message boards and trade blocks are great because people are busy just getting down to the practical matter of things, and don't really have time to dig in and know everyone's roster needs and stuff like that. So I think putting it out there makes it easier, and you don't really have to overthink it. You do not work for the CIA. You don't have to keep it secret. So, just put it out there and try to make something happen.
I think some people see it kind of like if you were selling your house and you added a motivated seller sign on top of the for sale sign. You assume you're going to get worse offers as a result of putting that in there. But you just say no to the worst offers. It really isn't the end of the world. It does save people a lot of time, too, if you can at least put out an idea. I'm looking for power. I'm looking for speed. I'm looking for starting pitching. Then the handful of teams that have a lot of starting pitchers or speed or power, whatever you're looking for, they might actually come out to you, or at least at that point, if they do make an offer, it's something you need and not something you don't, which is certainly good. Any other trade wisdom that anybody would like to impart on the group before we go?
I'd like to step in here. You don't have to complete a trade for the sake of making a trade. That's something that I ran into early on in fantasy baseball, is just I got to make a trade. I got to add it to my, fantasy resume or whatever. Look, you have good players on your team. There's no reason you need to give up more than you're willing just to get someone in return. You sometimes just need to know when to walk away or, say no to a bad offer. You don't need to just trade all the time. You can make additions in other ways.
Yeah, you can hit a dead end sometimes and just say, actually, no, this isn't going to work out, and just kind of peace out after a while. Do it politely, of course, but I would agree with you. Just because you've spent half an hour or an hour working on a trade doesn't mean you actually have to finish a trade that you decide at the end of the process, this actually isn't a good deal for me. I actually don't want to get this done. Yeah, I think we're getting the music. He's gonna play us off
here's
the stage.
the thing.
Here he
Here's the
comes.
thing. I'm gonna say this for you. I know all of you have gotten this question. Hey, who could I get for X?
Yeah.
And oh man, if there's any way to bother us, it's to do that. Look, we want to help you, but the process is always you have a player you want to trade. Look at everyone else in your league, see if they can find a use for said player. If they can, and only then do you then look at the other players that they could give up for said player. That's the trading process. We have no idea what you can get for that player. If you have a couple ideas, we can help you there. But that's it. Sorry, I figured I could say that on behalf of all of you, and you'd agree about that one.
We agree.
Oh, man. But anyway, fantastic panel. Really, I think this helped a lot of people. Really, really cool to see all of you here. Thanks so much for supporting PitchCon and being here today, and then taking the time, a full hour. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick.